My family disowned me for being too honest. I had no idea this decision would make me rich. You know that moment when your whole world crumbles, but somehow you're still standing? Yeah, that was me at 18, staring at my dad's face carved from disappointment, and my older brother looking through me like I was already a ghost. The house we called home had thick walls that kept secrets better than they kept warmth, and that's where they delivered the ultimatum that would change everything. The family business. That's what we called it, though you'd never see our name on any storefront signs. Everyone in the county knew what our last name meant, what it smelled like when the wind was just right. Let's just say we specialized in things that fell off trucks, and trucks that happened to be in the wrong place at convenient times. My brother embraced it like it was his calling. Me? I'd seen too many neighbors disappear into the system for similar entrepreneurship. I wanted something clean, something I could be proud of telling people about. My brother got the college fund, the future, the hope, being the firstborn son who never questioned the family methods. Me? I got a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Join the operation that paid well, but came with sleepless nights and constant looking over your shoulder, or walk away with nothing but my conscience intact. Work for them, or walk away forever. I chose the horizon of uncertainty. Sometimes you gotta let the old stars burn out before you can see the new ones. Or maybe life just shoves you off the constellation you thought you belonged to. That first night in my new place, a beat-up trailer on the edge of the trailer park, where nobody asked questions about your past, was colder than a banker's handshake. I'd used my last paycheck to deposit and first month's rent. The only light came from my phone screen, dying slower than my optimism. My body was growling louder than any conversation in the trailer from the past week. I tried starting a fire with old utility bills. Didn't work. But man, they sure burned bright in my hands while they lasted. The silence was deafening. Not the peaceful kind you get in nature, but the hollow kind that echoes with everything you've lost. I sat there thinking about how quickly family can become strangers, how 18 years of shared meals and Christmas mornings can evaporate faster than morning dew on hot asphalt. That's when I heard her, Mrs. Allen from next door, wandering around her yard in a bathrobe that had seen better decades. At first, I thought she was talking to herself, but then she knocked on my window. She squinted at me through the glass like she was trying to focus a broken telescope. When I opened the door, she smiled that confused smile that made my heart ache a little. "You haven't seen my keys, have you, honey?" And the bracelet that sang, it tinkled so melodiously when you shook it, like a tiny choir of angels in your pocket. I'd seen plenty of folks in our county dealing with memory issues, but there was something poetic about the way Mrs. Allen talked, like her mind was painting watercolors instead of speaking in straight lines. I told her I hadn't seen any keys or singing bracelets, but I'd keep an eye out. She patted my arm with fingers soft as tissue paper and said something about rain playing music on pipes before wandering back to her house. I watched her go, feeling that familiar knot in my stomach that comes when you see someone lost in their own life. The next morning brought the kind of silence that makes you question if the world forgot you existed. I was heating water for instant coffee with a camping stove when I heard scratching coming from a pile of old rags near Mrs. Allen's back porch. Curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back. That's what my grandmother used to say. The scratching got more frantic, and I realized something was trapped. Under a moldy cardboard box, wrapped in what used to be a towel, was this tiny creature that looked like she'd been through a tornado and came out the other side madder than hell. Bronze and smoky fur, eyes like black marbles, an attitude that said she'd rather bite you than trust you. A ferret, half-starved and completely feral. She hissed when I reached for her, but didn't run. Sometimes desperation looks like courage, and sometimes courage looks like two broke souls recognizing each other in the ruins of their respective disasters. I had 2 eggs. That was it, my entire food supply. But looking at this little fighter, I knew what I had to do. I cracked one open, separated the white from the yolk, and offered her the protein in my palm. She approached like I might be setting a trap, sniffed once, then devoured that egg white like it was the finest caviar in Paris. Her tiny paws wrapped around my finger when she finished, and I swear that was the strongest handshake I'd gotten in months. "Sable," I said, watching how the light caught the bronze in her fur. "You look like a sable." She tilted her head, and for a moment, I thought I saw something almost human in those marble eyes. Recognition, maybe, or just relief that someone finally saw her as more than a pest. While she cleaned herself with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker, I set up a makeshift bed from an old sweater. She circled it 3 times before settling in, and I couldn't help but smile. Even in survival mode, some creatures held on to their rituals. That afternoon, while I was trying to figure out how to make $23 last until I found work, Sable disappeared. 1 minute she was napping in her sweater nest. The next she was gone like smoke and wind. I panicked. Losing the only living thing that seemed to give a damn about my existence wasn't on my agenda for the day. I called her name, checked under every bush, even asked Mrs. Allen if she'd seen a bronze ferret running around. Mrs. Allen just smiled that distant smile and said something about tiny dancers in the walls. 2 hours later, Sable came waddling back with something dragging behind her, a tangled chain of cheap gold plating wrapped around what looked like a small pendant. She dropped it at my feet like a cat bringing home a mouse, then sat back on her haunches with an expression that clearly said, "You're welcome." The chain was tarnished, the kind of jewelry you'd find in a discount store or a gas station impulse buy. But the pendant itself was different. Older, it had weight to it. And when I held it up to the light, I could see tiny engravings that looked hand-carved rather than machine-made. This wasn't just random junk. This was something that once mattered to someone. I knocked on Mrs. Allen's door, pendant in hand. When she answered, I showed her what Sable had found. Her reaction stopped me cold. She took the pendant with trembling fingers, held it close to her eyes, then shook her head slowly. "No, this isn't him. The other one lies where the rain plays its song on the pipe. Rain on pipes. The bracelet that sang. Tiny dancers in walls." My grandmother always said that when people's minds start slipping, sometimes they tell more truth than when they're crystal clear. Mrs. Allen wasn't just rambling. She was giving me clues to a puzzle I didn't even know existed. That evening, I watched Sable explore every corner of our shared space with the intensity of a detective at a crime scene. She'd sniff, scratch, then move on to the next spot with purpose that seemed almost supernatural. But here's the thing about ferrets most people don't know. They're not mystical creatures. They're just incredibly curious, with noses that can detect scents from weeks ago and memories that map every interesting smell in their territory. What looked like magic was actually biology doing its job. When she squeezed under a loose piece of siding near Mrs. Allen's foundation and came back covered in dust and cobwebs, I knew she found something else. But this time, she didn't bring anything back. This time, she just looked at me and chattered in that ferret language that sounds like tiny motors running on excitement. I knelt down and peered into the gap where she'd been exploring. The space was bigger than it looked from the outside, and my phone's flashlight revealed what appeared to be a small cavity between the walls. Old houses, especially the ones built during the post-war boom, sometimes had these dead spaces where pipes or wiring changes left hollow areas. But this wasn't accidental construction. Someone had deliberately created this hiding spot. The implications hit me like a truck doing 90 on a back road. Mrs. Allen's cryptic references to singing bracelets and rain on pipes weren't the confused ramblings of a fading mind. They were breadcrumbs leading to something hidden, something valuable enough to hide, something forgotten by time but remembered by walls. I looked at Sable, who was cleaning dust from her whiskers with the satisfaction of a job well done. This little scavenger had stumbled onto something bigger than both of us, and she knew it. The responsible thing would have been to call Adult Protective Services, report the finding, let the professionals handle whatever this was. But 18-year-old me, broke angry and desperate for any sign that life had more to offer than the family business or minimum wage, saw an opportunity, not to steal, never to steal, but to uncover, to preserve, to maybe find a way that helped both Mrs. Allen and the kid who'd been kicked out of his own life story. I spent that night researching property laws, inheritance regulations, and the legal definition of abandoned property. The internet in our corner of nowhere was slower than Christmas morning, but I eventually found what I needed to know. Found property isn't automatically yours, especially when it's found in someone else's home. But if the owner can't properly care for their possessions due to cognitive decline, and if the finding is properly documented and reported to appropriate authorities, there are legal pathways for preservation and recovery fees. The key word was properly. Everything had to be documented, witnessed, and handled through official channels. No cutting corners, no gray areas, no room for anyone to question the ethics of what I was about to do. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to the county social services office, calling as a concerned neighbor to explain that I had worries about an elderly lady next door who seemed to be experiencing memory issues and might need assistance. I kept it simple, kept it anonymous, kept it focused on her well-being rather than my discoveries. The second call was scarier. Talking to a local attorney who specialized in elder care and estate planning meant stepping into a world where my words mattered in ways I wasn't used to. I was afraid they'd think I was scheming something, trying to take advantage of a confused old woman. But fear makes a terrible advisor, and silence makes an even worse one. Both conversations planted seeds that would grow into the legal framework I'd need later. But more importantly, they established a paper trail proving my intent was preservation, not exploitation. Sable watched these preparations with the intensity of a general planning a campaign. When I finished my calls, she headed straight for the gap in the siding, looked back at me once, then disappeared into the darkness between the walls. This time, when she came back, she was covered in more than just dust. This time, she smelled like secrets. I thought I was rescuing a ferret. Truth was, she just started rescuing me. The story I was about to live wasn't just about treasure hidden in walls or the kindness of strangers or even the legal complexities of found property. It was about how life sometimes flips your entire world upside down just to show you what was always there, waiting in the shadows for someone brave enough to look. Or maybe stubborn enough to follow a ferret into the dark spaces where forgotten dreams go to hide. Either way, everything was about to change. And Sable knew it first. You know how some ideas hit you at 3 a.m. and seem brilliant until you actually try them? That was me the next day, staring at a $5 action camera I'd bought from a gas station clearance bin and wondering how to turn my ferret into a documentary filmmaker. The plan was simple in theory. Strap the camera to Sable's back, let her explore those wall cavities I couldn't reach, and see what secrets the darkness was hiding. Reality, however, had other plans. My first attempt looked like something a 5-year-old would design if you gave them duct tape and told them to make a space suit for a hamster. The camera was bigger than Sable's head. The harness was made from shoelaces and hope, and the whole contraption had the structural integrity of a house of cards in a tornado. Sable took one look at my engineering masterpiece and gave me the kind of stare that clearly said, "You've got to be kidding me." But here's the thing about ferrets. They're curious enough to forgive your stupidity if there's adventure involved. She let me strap the contraption onto her back, took 3 steps, and promptly rolled over like a turtle, legs flailing in the air. The camera popped off and skittered across the floor like a hockey puck, coming to rest under Mrs. Allen's porch with a sound that suggested it had met its maker. I spent the next hour on my hands and knees in the dirt, flashlight between my teeth, cursing my lack of engineering skills while Sable watched from a safe distance. She seemed to find my predicament hilarious, which I guess it was if you weren't the one eating dirt and spider webs. Engineering attempt number 2 involved less ambition and more common sense. I scaled down to a pen camera, one of those tiny spy gadgets they sell for home security, but everyone knows are really for catching cheating spouses or nosy roommates. This one was small enough to tape to Sable's harness without turning her into a walking electronics store. The test run went better. Sable moved like she was carrying a slightly annoying backpack, instead of like she was being crushed by the weight of my unrealistic expectations. The video quality was terrible, grainy, shaky footage that looked like it was shot during an earthquake by someone with Parkinson's. But it worked, and what it showed me changed everything. The cavity behind Mrs. Allen's wall wasn't just a random gap in construction. It was deliberate. Someone had carefully created the space, lined it with what looked like old canvas, and used it to store things that mattered. The camera caught glimpses of fabric, the corner of what might have been a box, and something that reflected light like metal or glass. But here's where Sable proved she was smarter than my technology. While I was focused on the main hiding spot, she'd been exploring a completely different area. She emerged from a crack near the foundation, carrying a small velvet pouch that looked like it hadn't seen daylight since the Carter years. Inside were old buttons, the kind you find on vintage coats or military uniforms, and one ring that made my heart stop. It wasn't costume jewelry. Even my untrained I could tell this was a real deal. The metal had that weight and color that screams expensive even when it's tarnished with age. Art Deco style, with tiny diamonds arranged in a pattern that caught the light like trapped stars. This wasn't a trinket someone had dropped and forgotten. This was family money. This was the kind of thing you inherit, not the kind of thing you buy at a department store with a credit card. I sat there holding this ring, feeling the weight of it, and realized I was in way over my head. This wasn't just about helping an old lady find her lost bracelet anymore. This was about something bigger, something that could change lives or destroy them depending on how I handled it. The responsible thing would have been to march straight to Mrs. Allen's door and hand over everything Sable had found. But I'd learned enough about her condition to know that might not be the kindest approach. Dementia doesn't work on a schedule, and dropping a pile of valuable jewelry in someone's lap during a bad day could cause more confusion than clarity. Instead, I decided to document everything. I pulled out my phone and started recording as I showed Mrs. Allen the ring, explaining where Sable had found it and asking if she remembered it. Her reaction broke my heart and raised more questions than it answered. She held the ring close to her eyes, squinting at it like she was trying to read fine print in the dark. Then she nodded slowly and said something that sent chills down my spine. My Harold said to leave them in the darkness until I remember, so we don't forget where we came from. Harold, past tense, her husband, probably dead for years, but still giving her instructions to the fog of her fading memory. And them, plural. This ring wasn't alone. There were more treasures hidden in the walls of her house, waiting for someone to find them or for time to erase their existence completely. I felt like I was holding a piece of someone's life story, and the responsibility was heavier than the platinum in my palm. The next morning, I took a trip to Jimmy's Pawn and Gun. Not because I wanted to sell the ring, but because I needed to know what I was dealing with. Jimmy had been buying and selling other people's desperate mistakes for 30 years, and his eye for value was legendary in our county. He took one look at the ring through his jeweler's loupe and whistled low. This is real platinum, kid. Hand-forged, probably 1920s or 30s. Those diamonds are old cut. They don't make them like this anymore. You're looking at $3,500, maybe $4,000 if you find the right buyer. For $1,000. That was more money than I'd ever seen in one place that wasn't behind bulletproof glass at a bank. Jimmy offered to buy it on the spot, cash in hand, no questions asked. I said no. Jimmy leaned back in his chair and studied me like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve. You sure, son? Cash money right now. Beats waiting around for maybe money later. But as he was putting the ring back in its velvet pouch, he muttered something that stuck with me. Things like this, you might want to keep quiet about. Either family members crawl out of the woodwork, or the tax man comes knocking. Neither one's much fun. I thanked him and left, but his words followed me home like a stray dog. I hadn't thought about relatives or taxes, or any of the legal complications that come with finding valuable things in other people's houses. At 18, my biggest financial concern had been making $23 last until I found work. Now I was sitting on thousands of dollars worth of jewelry that technically belonged to a woman who might not remember owning it. The ethical implications were giving me a headache. That afternoon brought the first real rain we'd had in weeks. I was sitting in my trailer, listening to the water drum against the aluminum roof, when I remembered Mrs. Allen's cryptic comment about rain playing music on pipes. I grabbed an umbrella and went outside to investigate. The sound was coming from a corroded downspout on the side of her house, but it wasn't just normal rain-on-metal noise. There was an echo to it, a hollow resonance that suggested the water was falling into an empty space rather than flowing directly into the ground. Rain had always been my favorite symphony, but that day it was playing a melody of mystery. Every drop hitting that pipe seemed to say, "There's something here. Keep looking." I followed the downspout to where it disappeared into the foundation, and sure enough, there was a gap. Not big enough for me, but perfect for a curious ferret with a camera strapped to her back. Sable needed no encouragement. She'd been watching my investigation with the intensity of a detective reviewing case files, and when I pointed toward the gap, she was already in motion. The footage she brought back made my hands shake. There was definitely a void space behind that foundation wall, and it wasn't empty. The camera had captured glimpses of a wooden box with brass corners, the kind of container people use for important documents or family heirlooms back when such things were built to last forever. But I didn't open it. Not yet. Some instinct told me to wait, to make sure I understood the full scope of what I was dealing with before I crossed any lines I couldn't uncross. Sable, meanwhile, had developed her own opinion about what constituted treasure. While I was obsessing over wooden boxes and hidden compartments, she disappeared into yet another crevice and emerged with what appeared to be an old spoon. I laughed to spite myself. Great. At least it's not a sock. This confirms you're an animal, not a magical GPS system. At one point she came back covered in cobwebs, carrying what turned out to be a half-eaten crayon. Not every mission was a success. But even her failures reminded me that I was working with a curious animal, not some supernatural treasure detector from a fairy tale. But even the actual spoon told a story. It was silver-plated, with a monogram that had been worn smooth by decades of use. Someone had cared enough about this utensil to engrave their initials on it, to mark it as special enough to keep. Now it was just another casualty of time and neglect, rescued from oblivion by a ferret, who didn't know the difference between treasure and trash. The third hiding spot yielded something that changed the entire game. Tucked into a gap behind what used to be a decorative baseboard, Sable found a small notebook with water-stained pages and handwriting that looked like it had been done with shaking hand. Most of the pages were too damaged to read, but a few contained sketches and notes that made my pulse quicken. Simple drawings of the house's layout, with X marks beside cryptic references. Red pipe, warm wall, under blue glass. This wasn't random. This was a map. Someone, presumably Harold, had systematically hidden valuables throughout the house and created a guide to finding them. But the guide was written in the shorthand of memory, designed to make sense to someone who already knew the house intimately. I spent that evening trying to decode Harold's map, cross-referencing his clues with what I could see of Mrs. Allen's property. Red pipe probably referred to the old cast-iron plumbing. Warm wall could be the side of the house that got afternoon sun, or maybe the wall near the fireplace. Under blue glass was anyone's guess, but the implications were staggering. If Harold had hidden valuable items throughout the house, and if that ring was representative of the overall quality, we weren't talking about spare change hidden in coffee cans. We were talking about a systematic preservation of wealth, probably accumulated over decades and hidden during uncertain times. The question that kept me awake that night wasn't what else was hidden. It was why Harold had felt the need to hide it in the first place. And then there was Mrs. Allen herself, slipping further into the fog of dementia with each passing day. Her lucid moments were becoming rarer, her confusion more profound. How long before she forgot about Harold completely? How long before she forgot about the treasures he'd hidden for safekeeping? I was racing against time and memory, trying to solve the puzzle before the person who held a key to understanding had disappeared entirely into the labyrinth of her failing mind. The notebook felt fragile in my hands, like it might crumble at any moment, just like Mrs. Allen's memories, just like my chances of doing the right thing before it was too late. What if this wasn't just a treasure map? What if it was a road map through a woman's mind as she lost it? Could I read Harold's intentions faster than dementia could erase them? And more importantly, should I? I looked at Sable, who was grooming herself with the satisfaction of a job well done. She'd shown me 3 hiding spots in 2 days, each one revealing something more valuable than the last. If the pattern held, we were just getting started. But I was beginning to understand that the real treasure wasn't what we might find hidden in the walls. It was a race against time to preserve someone's history before it vanished forever into the darkness of a disease that steals memories the way thieves steal jewelry. Carefully, quietly, one precious thing at a time. Tomorrow, I'd start working through Harold's list systematically. Tonight, I'd lie awake wondering if I was saving Mrs. Allen's legacy or exposing it to vultures who'd pick her memories clean. Either way, there was no turning back now. Sable had opened a door into the past, and I was about to walk through it, ready or not. Sometimes doing the right thing feels like walking through a minefield in the dark. That's exactly where I found myself the morning after discovering Harold's treasure map. Staring at my phone with Mrs. Davis from County Social Services on speed dial. The smart play would have been to open that wooden box myself, catalog what was inside, maybe pocket a few items nobody would miss. The 18-year-old part of my brain was screaming about missed opportunities and easy money. But the part of me that had walked away from the family business knew better. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. Witnesses, documentation, paper trails that would make a forensic accountant weep with joy. Because the moment you start cutting corners on ethics, you become exactly the kind of person who creates problems instead of solving them. Mrs. Davis arrived at 10 sharp, carrying a clipboard thick enough to build a small house, and wearing the kind of professional smile that said she'd seen every scam in the book. She was probably expecting another case of someone trying to take advantage of an elderly person's confusion. What she found instead was me with a video camera, Sable in her improvised harness, and a carefully prepared presentation about proper documentation procedures. I walked her through everything: how I found the first items, the legal research I'd done, the steps I'd taken to ensure transparency. Her expression shifted from skeptical to impressed faster than a weather change in tornado season. We approached the wooden box together, my phone recording every movement, every word, every moment of discovery. When I lifted the brass-cornered lid, both of us went dead silent. The platinum bracelet lay on top, like it was posing for a magazine cover. Even tarnished with age, it caught the light and threw it back like liquid starfire. Delicate chain links connected dozens of tiny charms, each one moving just enough to create that musical tinkling Mrs. Allen had described. The bracelet that sang. Beneath it were earrings that matched the ring Sable had found. Same Art Deco style. Same quality that screamed, this cost more than most people's cars. 3 gold coins sat in individual velvet compartments, each one bearing dates that made them older than anyone living in our county. Every item that emerged from that darkness felt like a whisper from the past, growing into a shout. My hands were shaking, but it wasn't fear. It was reverence mixed with a healthy dose of panic. What was I supposed to do with artifacts that could fund someone's retirement? Mrs. Davis made calls. Lots of calls. We also tried reaching Harold's known relatives to invite them to witness the appraisal process, but nobody answered. Small towns have their own communication network, though. Word travels faster than light when official vehicles show up at your neighbor's house. Within 2 hours, we had a certified appraiser driving down from the state capitol, carrying equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. Margaret Chun was the kind of professional who probably appraised jewelry for insurance companies when she wasn't working crime scenes for the state police. She arrived with a portable lab setup, microscopes, ultraviolet lights, digital calipers, and testing solutions that could tell you if something was authentic platinum from 50 yards away. Watching her work was like attending a masterclass in detective work. Each piece got photographed from 12 angles, measured 1,000 an inch, tested for metal purity, and examined under magnification that revealed details invisible to the naked eye. Her preliminary assessment stopped my heart. Conservative estimate, we're looking at $500,000. Potentially more provenance can be established, and the watch you mentioned turns out to be authentic. This kind of collection, it doesn't happen by accident. Everything was documented on video for legal transparency. Mrs. Davis insisted on that. Whatever happened next, no one could claim we'd hidden anything or conducted secret appraisals. That's when the vultures arrived. I was helping Mrs. Chin pack up her equipment when a black sedan pulled into Mrs. Allen's driveway, like it owned the place. Word had gotten around, apparently. In small towns, official vehicles and strangers with expensive equipment don't go unnoticed for long. 2 men in suits that cost more than my trailer emerged, moving with the kind of confidence that comes from a lifetime of getting their way through intimidation and legal threats. Harold's nephews, apparently, Carl and Dennis Morrison. both looking like they'd stepped out of an insurance commercial, complete with briefcases and attitudes that suggested everyone else in the world was stealing their inheritance. Carl did the talking while Dennis took pictures of everything with a phone that probably cost more than I'd made in the past 6 months. Their message was crystal clear. Everything in that house belonged to them by right of family connection, and I was nothing but an opportunistic stranger trying to profit from their aunt's confusion. They looked at me like I was something they'd scrape off their shoes after walking through a dog park. Mrs. Davis handled them with the kind of professional politeness that barely concealed her complete lack of patience for their entitled attitude. She explained the legal requirements for estate management when the property owner had cognitive issues, the procedures for establishing guardianship, and the documentation requirements for recovering lost assets. The nephews listened with the expression of people being told that gravity was optional and they couldn't fly just because they really wanted to. Their counterproposal was to file for immediate conservatorship, bypass all the bureaucratic nonsense, and handle the family assets themselves. After all, they were blood relatives. What more qualification did they need? Mrs. Davis suggested they contact their attorney and prepare for a formal hearing. The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. That's when the social worker revealed why she became such a fierce advocate for proper procedures. She recommended establishing a revocable trust, specifically the Allen Heritage Care Trust, designed to preserve and manage the discovered assets while ensuring Mrs. Allen's care and well-being remained the primary focus. The trust would provide me with a 12% finder and preservation fee, calculated only on items that were actually sold, plus a 5% annual management fee for administering the trust. To put that in perspective, if they eventually sold pieces worth $100,000, my fee would be $12,000 plus $5,000 annually for managing the process. Not a windfall, but fair compensation for the work and legal risk involved. More importantly, it would create a legal framework that protected Mrs. Allen from family members who seemed more interested in quick liquidation than long-term care. The nephews were not pleased with this development. After the officials left, Carl and Dennis requested a private conversation. We met in the parking lot of a diner that had seen better decades, where they made me an offer that revealed exactly who they really were. $50,000. Cash. Right now. All I had to do was forget about the trust paperwork, forget about the formal procedures, and walk away from the whole situation. They'd handle everything from here, and I'd have more money than I'd ever seen in my life. The cash was real. They showed me the briefcase, neat stacks of hundreds that smelled like possibility and temptation. Enough money to start over anywhere, buy a decent car, maybe even go to college if I was smart about it. I recorded my answer for posterity. Thank you for the offer, but I'm going to stick with the legal process. Mrs. Allen deserves better than backroom deals. That cash didn't smell like money. It smelled like quick shame and the kind of regret that follows you around for the rest of your life. This was my moment to choose who I wanted to become, someone who took shortcuts when things got complicated, or someone who did the hard work of staying honest when it mattered most. The next few days brought an education in just how complicated doing the right thing can be. Meanwhile, Sable had developed her own opinion about the increased foot traffic around our treasure hunting operation. She spent most of one afternoon bringing me increasingly useless items. Dust bunnies, a dead bug, what appeared to be a piece of dried-out gum from a previous decade. But then the dead bug produced something interesting. As I was disposing of her latest treasure, a fragment of old fabric fell out of the insect's dried shell. Military chevron stripes, faded but recognizable. I remembered seeing a similar pattern carved into the stone facade near Mrs. Allen's fireplace. Even Sable's failures were trying to tell me something. That evening, Mrs. Allen had one of her increasingly rare moments of clarity. She was sitting by her window, watching the sunset paint her yard in shades of gold and amber, when she started talking about the warm wall again. This time, I understood, the wall adjacent to her fireplace would be the warmest spot in the house during winter months. If Harold had been hiding things systematically, he'd have chosen locations based on practical considerations, places that stayed dry, stayed warm, stayed forgotten until someone knew where to look. X marks the spot. Harold's second major hiding place was probably behind that warm wall, waiting for someone brave enough or desperate enough to find it. The preliminary appraisal report arrived the next day, typed on official letterhead that made everything feel suddenly real and permanent. Conservative estimates, replacement values, market conditions, pages of technical language that boiled down to one simple fact. Mrs. Allen was sitting on enough money to change lives. The question was whose life would be changed, and how. I was still processing the implications when the certified mail arrived. Court documents, filed faster than I thought possible, requesting an expedited hearing on the matter of Harold Allen's estate and conversion of family assets by unauthorized individuals. The nephews had lawyerette up. The hearing was scheduled for the following week, much earlier than anyone had expected. Apparently, accusations of asset conversion got the court's attention in ways that routine estate management did not. I found myself staring at legal papers that use words like misappropriation and unlawful possession to describe what I thought was preservation and documentation. The nephews were claiming I'd manipulated a confused elderly woman into letting me steal her family's inheritance. Suddenly, my careful documentation and transparent procedures weren't just ethical choices. They were the only thing standing between me and a legal nightmare that could destroy any chance I had of building a legitimate life. Now I could either show everything, risk losing any financial benefit, but prove my integrity, or try to hide what I'd found and lose the person I was trying to become. The choice was obvious, but the cost was unknown. It felt like the whole world was watching, waiting to see if I'd stand up or break down. Whether I'd prove that an 18-year-old dropout could handle more responsibility than grown men in expensive suits. Whether doing the right thing was worth doing when the wrong people were keeping score. I looked at the court papers one more time, then at Sable, who was grooming herself with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted that truth eventually wins out over convenience. Time to prove that truth can still win, even when it's outnumbered by lawyers in expensive suits. Walking into court to defend something that matters feels like stepping into a ring with brass knuckles and nothing but good intentions. My lawyer, Sarah Mitchell, was the kind of person who'd probably argued cases in front of judges who remembered when the courthouse was built. She explained the difference between lost property and mislaid property in terms simple enough for someone whose legal education came from late-night TV shows. Lost means the owner accidentally dropped it and doesn't know where. Mislaid means they put it somewhere on purpose and forgot where that somewhere was. The difference would determine whether I had any claim at all. "Remember, Marcus," she said, adjusting her reading glasses that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "In this process, your honesty is your strongest card. Judges appreciate truth, even when it sounds like something out of an adventure novel." That honesty was about to be tested in ways I hadn't expected. Before the hearing, I decided to follow up on Harold's Warmwall clue. If I was going to stand before a judge and claim I'd been systematically preserving Mrs. Allen's heritage, I needed to know the full scope of what we were dealing with. The wall adjacent to her fireplace had subtle differences in the plaster, patches that looked newer, sections that sounded hollow when tapped. Sable's camera work confirmed what I suspected. Another deliberate hiding space, this one larger and more carefully constructed than the others. What came out of that wall made my previous discoveries look like spare change. A vintage Patek Philippe watch, still running despite decades of hiding. The kind of timepiece that sells at auction houses where people bid with subtle nods and numbers that would make your mortgage payment look like lunch money. A velvet pouch containing cameo brooches that belonged to museums, each one carved with the precision of Renaissance masters. For more gold coins, these bearing dates that made them contemporary with the founding of our state. This was the moment I realized the game had become deadly serious. Each item that emerged from the darkness felt like it was shouting, "We were here. We waited." The estimated value was climbing toward numbers that could change multiple generations of lives. But numbers on paper mean nothing if vultures in suits can convince a judge you stole them. The local news picked up the story first. Channel 7's evening reporter, a woman who'd probably covered every county fair and high school football game for the past decade, treated it like a heartwarming human interest piece. Stray ferret helps young man discover hidden family treasures. Feel-good fluff for the dinner hour. Then the skeptics found it. There's always one blogger who thinks everything interesting is fake. This particular genius, writing under the username TruthSeeker2024, published a detailed analysis of why my story was obviously fabricated. His main evidence? Nobody could train a ferret to plant specific items in specific locations. He clearly never met a ferret, because anyone who knows you can barely train them to come when called, let alone execute an elaborate treasure-planting conspiracy. His post got shared 11,000 times. Suddenly, my heartwarming story was trending as an example of everything wrong with social media and gullible news outlets. The comment section was a battlefield between people who wanted to believe something good could happen to someone who deserved it, and people who were convinced that if they hadn't experienced it personally, it couldn't be real. The hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and broken dreams. Carl and Dennis Morrison showed up with their attorney, a man whose suit probably cost more than I'd made in the past year, and whose smile suggested he'd eaten bigger fish than me for breakfast. Their strategy was simple. Paint me as a manipulative opportunist who'd taken advantage of a confused elderly woman. They had character witnesses ready to testify about Mrs. Allen's declining mental state, financial experts to discuss the improbability of finding such valuable items by accident, and enough legal precedent to bury my case under an avalanche of paperwork. I had video footage and the truth. In American courtrooms, those don't always win. Judge Patricia Hendricks had the kind of presence that made everyone sit up straighter and speak more clearly. She'd probably seen every scam, every scheme, and every desperate attempt to turn tragedy into profit that our county had produced in the past 30 years. The nephew's attorney painted a picture of systematic exploitation. A young man with a questionable family background who'd ingratiate himself with a vulnerable woman, convinced her to let him search her property, and now claimed ownership of valuable family heirlooms based on the supposed behavior of a trained animal. When my turn came, I submitted the complete video record. Not highlights, not edited clips, but the full unbroken footage of Sable emerging from each hiding spot covered in decades of dust and cobwebs, her confused exploration of each cavity, the sound of Mrs. Allen coughing in the background during our conversations. You can fake a lot of things, but you can't fake the authentic infusion of an animal discovering something unexpected. The medical testimony proved crucial. Dr. Emily Rodriguez, who'd been treating Mrs. Allen for 3 years, explained that dementia doesn't erase property awareness. It impairs organizational ability. Mrs. Allen understood that the items belonged to her, but couldn't have systematically searched them or managed their preservation. The ethical argument was clear. Joint stewardship of the assets served her interests better than either abandonment or hasty liquidation by relatives who lived 3 states away and visited twice a year. Judge Hendricks deliberated for exactly 47 minutes, long enough to review the evidence thoroughly, short enough to suggest the decision wasn't particularly difficult. Interim trust order approved. Allen Heritage Care Trust established with me as temporary administrator. 8% finder's fee on documented items actually sold, plus supervised search rights for any remaining hidden assets. Victory, but with conditions. The real test would come later. It was during the post-hearing documentation process that disaster almost struck. We were carefully removing a section of baseboard near Harold's final map location when the aged plaster began crumbling faster than we could photograph it. One wrong move, and we could destroy whatever was hidden behind that wall, along with any proof that it had been deliberately concealed rather than accidentally lost. I stopped everything. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is nothing at all until you understand the full scope of what you're dealing with. That's when Mrs. Allen, watching from her chair by the window, offered the clue that would change everything. "There's still something breathing," she said, staring at the empty niche we just documented, in the leg where we used to put the lamp. I looked around her living room with new eyes. The bedside table, solid mahogany, with carved legs thick enough to hide anything from documents to jewelry. It had been sitting there the entire time, supporting a lamp that had probably illuminated this room for decades while guarding secrets in the darkness below. Sable confirmed my suspicions immediately. She spent 15 minutes circling that table, nose working overtime, before settling into focused attention that meant she'd found something worth investigating. The bottom of each leg was covered by a decorative cap, carved to match the overall design, but clearly removable if you knew what you were looking for. Inside the leg closest to the window, wrapped in waxcloth that preserved it like a time capsule, was a crown jewel of Harold's collection. The platinum necklace alone could have funded a small town's annual budget. The central diamond, an old mine cut that caught light and threw it back like captured starfire, was surrounded by smaller stones arranged in patterns that belonged in royal collections, not hidden in furniture legs. Matching earrings and a bracelet completed the set. When Margaretchen saw them via video call, her professional composure cracked. This is museum quality, a complete collector's story in itself. The estimate was staggering. $1.4 million added to a collection now valued at over $2 million total. But here's what money can't buy. The moment Mrs. Allen touched that central diamond and whispered, "Harold, my Harold," with perfect clarity. For 30 seconds, the fog lifted completely, and she was herself again. That 30-second window where she saw Harold again, that was the real treasure. A reminder that love doesn't forget, even when memory fails. The final court hearing was less dramatic than the first. Judge Hendricks reviewed the complete documentation, noted the transparent handling of each discovery, and approved the trust structure with my compensation increased to 12% of realized assets plus 5% annual management fees. The key word was realized. This wasn't lottery ticket money that appeared overnight. The collection would be sold carefully, piece by piece, to avoid flooding the market and to ensure Mrs. Allen's care needs were met first. The nephews left without saying goodbye. Sometimes losing gracefully is harder than losing badly. The media coverage exploded overnight. Stray Ferret Saves Legacy went viral on every platform that matters and several that don't. My YouTube channel gained 50,000 subscribers in a week. Sponsorship offers from companies making inspection equipment, home security systems, and pet supplies fill my inbox. But the real opportunity came from something I hadn't expected: insurance companies. Legacy Nook started as a joke name for what I thought would be a hobby. Ferret-assisted cavity inspection for families dealing with estate settlements or property sales. The idea was simple. Use Sable's natural curiosity and small cameras to check hidden spaces without tearing down walls. The first contract came from Allstate, who were settling a claim on a house fire and needed to verify that no valuables had been missed in spaces too small for human searchers. Sable found 3 rings and a savings bond that saved them $12,000 in additional claims. Word spread to the insurance industry faster than news of a rate increase. We were booked solid within a month. Then my family came calling. My brother wanted to partner on a treasure hunters brand. Dad offered to loan me money to expand operations, as if I hadn't walked away from his version of expansion on principle. They saw dollar signs where I saw a purpose. I looked at them across the kitchen table of their house, the same house where they'd given me an ultimatum between my ethics and their business. In their eyes, I saw no regret, no acknowledgement of what they'd put me through, just disappointment that they hadn't been the ones to find the treasure. I wanted to unleash everything that had built up over the months of silence. Every hurt, every moment of doubt, every night I'd gone to sleep wondering if doing the right thing was worth the cost. Instead, I kept it simple. I can't offer you money, but I can offer you work. Inventory management, logistics, basic documentation. Entry-level positions with room to grow if they proved they could handle responsibility without cutting corners. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was establishing healthy boundaries. Dad declined. My brother took the job and lasted 3 weeks before quitting to start his own treasure-hunting business that folded within 6 months. Some people never learn that there's no shortcut to building something that lasts. Part of my management fee went to establishing the Hidden Stories Foundation, free cavity inspections for elderly homeowners who couldn't afford our commercial rates. Because the real treasure isn't the objects we find, it's the trust we build by handling them properly, one discovery at a time. Every treasure is someone's story worth remembering. Mrs. Allen spends her days by the window now, Sable curled in her lap like they've been best friends for decades. She doesn't remember morning conversations, but she remembers the warmth of platinum between her fingers. She found her peace, and I found my path. Life throws challenges at everyone, but sometimes those challenges open doors to something incredible. The question isn't whether you'll face difficult choices. It's whether you'll have the courage to choose correctly when the easy path leads away from who you want to become. What's hiding in your attic? Your basement? Your grandmother's house that nobody's really searched since she passed? Maybe there's a hidden story waiting for someone brave enough to look for it properly. As I was putting the final documentation together for the trust, Sable emerged from under a baseboard I hadn't noticed before, carrying a small rusty key in her mouth. I looked at that key, then at Sable, then at Mrs. Allen's basement door that I'd never had reason to explore. Some stories end. Others just pause between chapters. Maybe Mrs. Allen has a few more surprises waiting in the shadows. Or maybe Sable just loves the hunt more than the treasure. Either way, something tells me our story isn't finished yet.